Hi, welcome to another episode of Tree Talk. I'm Jamie Dahl with Central State University Extension. I'm here with Marne Titchenell, who's with Ohio State University Extension, and we're going to be talking about wildlife and oak ecosystems, so stay tuned. Welcome to another segment of Tree Talk. I'm Jamie Dahl with Central State University Extension, and I'm here with Marne Titchenell with Ohio State University Extension. And Marne is going to be telling us some about wildlife and their connections to oak ecosystems. In this first segment, we're going to focus some on oak acorns and the connection to wildlife. So, hi Marne.
Hi Jamie.
So Marne, before we get started with oak and wildlife, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm well connected to oak ecosystems. I actually did my graduate work in oak ecosystems. I was studying the response of bat populations to shelterwood harvests.
Oh, wow.
So as I'm sure you know, oaks are in decline. Oak hickory forests are in decline here in Ohio. We're finding them switching to a little bit of a maple beech ecosystem. And one of the ways to kind of regenerate those oak species is to introduce disturbance, whether that's fire or, in the case of my research, it was harvesting.
Okay.
And so my job was to go in and to see how the harvest impacted the bat populations.
Great, yeah, thanks Marne. And certainly fans of Tree Talk have seen some episodes where we've continue to talk about that oak ecosystem and the challenges with getting those oaks to grow back.
Right.
And yeah, shelterwood is of course one of the management tools that can be utilized.
Exactly.
Great. So so you studied bats, but I'm guessing bats aren't the only species that's reliant on oak.
Right, no, definitely not. Oak ecosystems are incredibly diverse. They can offer a wide variety of food and cover resources to mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and the like.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And so what, what were some of the things you found with bats connected to oak?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, small, different bat species are designed differently. So they have unique morphologies, they have unique ways that they fly. Related to those morphologies, they echolocate differently. So what I found is that different species preferred to fly in different areas because of those different characteristics. Some of the bats preferred to forage in that open understory that was created by those shelterwood harvests.
Okay.
So
and shelterwood gives kind of a variety of structure in the forest. So
over time, right. I went in right after those harvests were completed, so it had created a pretty open understory. I know there were grad students that came in after me, and they had a lot of fun wading through the shrubs and some oak seedlings that had come in afterwards.
Okay,
so,
great. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the resources that these oak forests are providing to these wildlife species.
Right. So since we're talking oak ecosystems, we should probably start with oak acorns, right?
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So acorns are incredibly important. They're at the top of the list when it comes to wildlife food. So deer body mass and condition is directly related to acorn abundance and availability. We know that they're incredibly important for wild turkey as well, but they're important to a variety of other wildlife species as well. So one I wanted to talk a little bit about was the blue jay.
Okay.
So I think sometimes people think blue jays are kind of the bullies of the bird world. They have a lot of neat little characteristics and abilities. For example, one of the things that I think is really neat is they will imitate a red-tailed hawk call, and sometimes they'll do that to kind of alert other blue jays that there might be a hawk nearby or there's some sort of danger nearby. But other times they'll do it right before they fly into a bird feeder to kind of scatter the birds a little bit. Their crest on the top of their head is actually related to their aggression, their level of aggression. So in the picture you're looking at here, it's kind of back flat against the head. And so that's telling you that that blue jay is a little bit relaxed, and if it were to be popping up a little bit, it would be a little bit more aggressive. So it's kind of neat. But maybe my favorite thing with blue jays is this really neat relationship they have with oaks. It's kind of a mutualistic relationship, and it's primarily because blue jays disperse oak acorns. So blue jays eat a lot of different things. They're quite omnivorous, but oak acorns make up an important part of their diet. So they'll cache them, and sometimes thousands of acorns they will cache, one single blue jay, which is pretty impressive. And at times when any animal caches an acorn, they don't exactly remember where it goes, and that is when that oak acorn has the opportunity to germinate and become an oak.
Wow, that's really interesting, and I could see that being really crucial, because we know that an acorn that is below the leaf litter has a chance to really connect with that soil medium, is got a greater chance of germinating, and is also protected a little more from some of the other predation. So really important role that some of these caching animals play.
And it's been found that blue jays will, of course, with the ability of flight, they will fly those acorns further away from the parent tree, so really helping to disperse that seed away. And a lot of times it's been found they will cache them in a more sunlit area, which that's what oaks need to germinate. They need that good amount of sun. So it's uncanny how perfectly it works out sometimes.
Wow, yeah. And I believe there's actually some grad students at Ohio State that are continuing some research on blue jays.
So research out of the School of Environment and Natural Resources, PhD student Jay Wright, and then faculty members Dr. Tonra and Matthews are kind of asking some really interesting questions. In the face of the decline of oaks, how is that going to impact blue jay populations? And then, in turn, will a decline in a blue jay population, will that further impact our oak decline, since they do have that important role of acorn dispersal? So some really interesting questions that they're asking. It'll be neat to see what they find out.
How the species are intertwined. Absolutely.
Right.
Well, so that seems like a good transition to talk a little bit about what some of the differences are between some of these acorn species and their benefits for wildlife.
Right, exactly. So, when we were talking about blue jays, they have some preferences as well. Obviously, they're a smaller bird, so they're going to prefer the smaller acorns. But they've been also known to cache some of the larger acorns from our white oaks, for example. But I'll just pop a slide up here so you can kind of see some of the major differences between our red oak acorns and our white oak acorns. And when it comes to some animals like squirrels, for example, the difference is pretty huge. So Jamie, I don't know if you've ever noticed or spent time watching a squirrel forage for food. Sometimes when they have an acorn, they will kind of hold it up to their nose and kind of like rotate it a little bit, not necessarily eating it. Do you know what they're doing when they're doing that?
Are they giving it a sniff test?
They are. Yeah? That's exactly what they're doing. They're giving it a sniff test. They're trying to figure out if it's that red oak acorn or a white oak acorn, because red oaks are going to last longer. They're better for caching, so they're going to last through the winter, whereas a white oak acorn is just simply not going to last. And you can, if you saw those other differences there, the fat content is a little bit higher in red oaks. Again, really good for an animal that needs some sustenance during the winter. So squirrels, they're going to want to cache the red oak acorns. So if you see them kind of run off with that acorn, you can somewhat confidently say, oh, well, maybe that was a red oak. And if they eat the acorn right away, you can say somewhat confidently that it was a white oak acorn, or they were just really hungry.
That is really really interesting way to look at it there. So the white oak acorns, as you point out, then germinate in the fall, and of course that's part of the reason they don't last. They don't store.
Exactly. Yep.
So all right. And then I've also heard that the red oak has a higher tannin content, so it actually isn't as tasty, I don't believe, as the white oak.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's also part of what they're smelling when they do their sniff test. They can determine, that helps them determine which acorn type it is.
These squirrel preferences. Well, I'll have to. I have some squirrel hunters in my home, so I'll have to relay some of this good information.
I'm sure they've noticed. I sometimes find hunters are very, they are right on with wildlife behaviors.
Okay, so some key differences, and of course, for the forestry end of things, it's important for us to understand these differences when we look at forest management, because the white oaks are germinating in the fall, and then thinking about what we can anticipate from some of these acorn crops at different time of year. And of course that also plays a role in kind of if we have the white oaks, if they don't get some of the right conditions, they are a little more vulnerable too, because they are germinating. And so if they are not well prepared for when we get our first frost or different things, then we might see some more of those acorns die. So so the white oaks sometimes need a little more help getting established.
Right. It's all about diversity.
So it's nice to have a variety of acorns. So we get a variety of oaks coming up in the understory.
Exactly.
Okay. And so some of this really relates, though, to the energy that then transfers to wildlife, and so fat content and some of their preferences. So can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So there's a reason why acorns top the list of preferred wildlife foods, and it's exactly what you said. It's that fat content, it's the nutrients, it's the energy. Acorns really are these little bundles of energy. They're incredibly nutritious. So for example, our ruffed grouse, and I'll put a picture up there. Our ruffed grouse, if they eat about 12 or so acorns, that's all they need in a day, and that's it. That can provide them exactly what they need. Black bears. So this time of year, black bears are really packing on the pounds. They're getting ready to go into their dens for the winter, and they'll stay there essentially until the spring. If it's a female, she's going to have her cubs in the den. She's not really going to be eating a lot, so she is relying on all of that fat that she has put on right now, leading up into the winter. So something that is high in fat and rich in nutrients like acorns are incredibly important for our bear populations.
Okay, and so all the more reason that we need to really be proactive about making sure we maintain an oak component in these forests, because these wildlife species are dependent on it.
Right, and we can talk a little bit about our bear populations in case some of the watchers are wondering what they're doing here in Ohio. So our bear have been coming back into the state for actually since about the 1980s. As we've increased our forest cover in the eastern part and southern part of the state, they've been trickling in mostly from Pennsylvania. So the Division of Wildlife believes we have, anywhere from 50 to 100 bears coming into the state, and most of them are young males. So they're traveling in usually during the summertime, taking advantage of our resources, and then probably heading back out to Pennsylvania to overwinter. So I think most of the bears that people will see are probably in the northeastern corner of the state. Those tend to be where we have the most bear sightings, but not that you couldn't chance upon one during the summertime in the rest of the southern or eastern part of the state.
Very cool. Neat to see that some of our
very cool.
Some results from trying to rehabilitate some of these.
You put the habitat out there and they'll come.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I know that there's more that we can talk about with wildlife and oak.
Sure.
So maybe now we'll transition to talking a little bit about insects and pollinators and their connection to oaks.
Love to do that.
So stay tuned for that next segment. Hi, welcome to another episode of Tree Talk. I'm here with Marne Titchenell, and we are going to be talking about insects and their connection to the oak ecosystem. So, Marne, can you tell us a little bit about insects' reliance on oak ecosystems?
Right. So our oaks are incredibly important when it comes to our insects. And one group that I'll focus on are the lepidopterans. So if you're not familiar with lepidopterans, that's the order of insects that makes up our butterflies, our moths, and our skippers. What's a skipper? Kind of between a butterfly and a moth. We'll just leave it at that. Okay. So when it comes to oaks, they are important host plants for a lot of those species. And so a host plant, that's the plant that the female is going to lay her eggs on. And there are other attractive components of oaks, but we'll just leave it at that for now. But when we look at all of the different species of oaks in the United States, they are responsible for being a home for over 500 different species of lepidopterans. So I think it's 530 134 species to be exact, which that's a lot of species.
Yeah, that's impressive.
That's a surprising number. So, you know, not only is that important for the insects, and I'll share with you one of my favorite quotes. It's by E.O. Wilson, and he said that insects are the little things that run the world. And that's especially true when it comes to our terrestrial ecosystems, because our insects make up, you know, the base of just about every food chain out there, food web, I should say, out there. So they're incredibly important. We were talking about blue jays and other songbirds really rely on insects. The red-eyed vireo, a songbird that you will constantly hear in the forests of southern Ohio and eastern Ohio during the summertime, they are eating about 100% insects, and about 50% of that is caterpillars. So birds like that and a lot of our other migratory species are really depending on those insects as a food source.
Wow. And I know it seems like there's a lot in the news now about insect populations crashing and
Yes.
some concerns specifically with Lepidoptera and pollinators.
Right. You're exactly right. So there's definitely been research that has looked at and found declines in our terrestrial insect populations, which is incredibly concerning to me. As I said, they make up those base of many food webs. But when it comes to our pollinators, most definitely. You hear a lot in the news about the monarch butterfly and their populations declining. You hear a lot about bees declining. And so, you know, when we look at our oak ecosystems and how they are important to pollinators, we find that they also are very important to those pollinators as well. Mm-hmm. And I think folks don't normally think about a woodland being an important habitat for pollinators. A lot of times we get that vision of a sunlit meadow with flowers, and that is important pollinator habitat, especially as far as nectar resources. But in the forest, that's where you find the host plants. And for some of our pollinators, namely our native bees, many of them are solitary nesters. They're nesting in the ground, or they're nesting in cavities. And when I say a cavity, I don't just mean a hole in a tree. It could be a hollow stem or a hollow branch. And what better place to find a bunch of those but in a forest?
But in the forest.
Yeah.
Wow. So
yeah.
So really, once again, the forest as a whole, but then, you know, specifically the oak ecosystem having some really important roles.
Right. Specifically for the pollinators, and then of course, you know, there's the role of what pollinators do in the ecosystem, pollination. So I'll share with you a little slide that I put together to kind of display that. So what you're looking at, this is a sweat bee. It is a species here in Ohio, and it is a ground nester. And so what you're looking at is the female, and she's kind of working on building a little nest. She'll kind of dig out a little section in the ground. Actually, she's not. She's emerging at this point. But what the female will do is she'll dig this little cavity in the ground. She will put a little bit of bee bread in it, and then she'll lay an egg on it. And that little piece of bee bread, which is nectar and pollen, is all that egg needs to survive into adulthood. It'll emerge like you're looking at right here, and then go on to pollinate. But this little sweat bee is tied to populations of black bears, squirrels, white-tailed deer, and cedar waxwing. Okay. And the tie is that flower.
Interesting.
Do you recognize that flower? It's kind of a close-up.
Yeah, I'm not. So
it's actually it's a dogwood.
A dog? Oh my goodness. Okay, I see the four.
Yeah, I see the four petals now. Yeah. So then, you know, of course, that flower will eventually turn into berries, which are dogwood berries are an incredibly important staple in the diets for a lot of different wildlife species. But deer like them. Our songbirds love them. Squirrels, of course, and black bears will all munch on them.
On those dogwood berries, which disappear very quickly. Yes,
very quickly, right. So, you know, our woodlands are providing homes and resources for pollinators, and then they, in turn, are providing important resources to the wildlife as well.
Wow. So yeah, just all those important interconnections that we continue to see. But good to continually, as we think about the benefits of the forest, it's easy to miss things like the role that it has for pollinators. Right. So, so we've talked a lot about oak ecosystems and their connection to wildlife, but of course there are other sources of nutrition and other resources from other species in the forest.
Right.
So maybe it's a good time to transition and talk about some of that.
That sounds great.
All right. Thanks. Welcome to another segment of Tree Talk. I'm Jamie Dahl, and I'm here with Marne Titchenell with Ohio State University Extension, and we're going to be talking about the various resources in the forest that connect to wildlife beyond the oak ecosystem, which we've been focusing on earlier. So, hi, Marne.
Hi.
So tell us a little bit about I guess it seems important to start with what happens with oak mast and therefore why it's important to have a variety of resources.
Exactly. So, diversity is key. If we've learned nothing else as foresters and wildlife biologists, diversity is key, especially in light of invasive species and a lot of other threats to the forest these days. Diversity is key. And, so it's important to have those other food resources available. And I'll pop up a slide to show you specifically what goes on with oak acorn production. This is mass production from 2005 to 2017. And so what you have on the y-axis is that average percent of trees bearing acorns. And what I really just want you to notice here is that, how it goes up and down. The nature of oak production is cyclic. This is not unusual. This is just what it is out there. And in fact, a lot of our hard mast producing trees have this kind of cyclic production. So you see that dip in around 2011, it was, 15% of the trees were bearing acorns. Well, we've just talked about a lot of the wildlife species that depend on those resources. What are they going to do in those years? That's when they're going to turn to some of the other tree species in oak ecosystems that also bear fruit.
Okay, so that again, that diversity being really crucial.
Yes.
And of course, the cyclical nature, I see it, we just have through 2017, but we know, year to year, different species are just going to have more success than others. Another important thing for landowners, I think, is to get to know your forest, because sometimes individual trees, for various reasons, are better producers, and so that's something you want to think about when you're selecting what trees to leave behind, I think is important.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, right? If you know you have an oak out there that's producing well, leave it. That should be a tree that in your mind you flag as very important.
Yeah, at least until it grows some helps regenerate some new trees around it. And I know anecdotally it's important, we hear from you all, from landowners, what's happening out there, and I know some of what I've heard this year and seen myself, that white oaks did not seem to do as well. I was actually talking with a grad student researching white oak, and she was having great difficulty getting white oak mast to research from multiple states here in the Northeast. And then it was a really good year for beech, interestingly. So one of those alternate masts, and I don't know if anyone else noticed that, you may have only found the little husks because the nuts are valuable and get eaten up quickly, but there was a fair bit of beech mast out there. So just it varies year to year, and you got to look down and see what's happening.
And the wildlife are always looking down, right? So they know where to go. But one other species I want to talk about that can be quite prevalent in oak ecosystems would be hickories.
Okay, wonderful.
And so interesting little fun fact about hickory nuts is that they have a higher energy content per gram of dry weight than acorns. So basically what that means is you're getting a lot of energy with less weight. So for something like our birds, or I'll pop up a picture, this little guy, which is our southern flying squirrel. It's very important, and for any of our squirrels that spend their lives, running up and down trees, it's good to have more energy and less weight, right? So I love this picture of a little flying squirrel. It's actually gliding with a hickory nut in its jaws.
Very cool.
One of our very abundant squirrels that we have here in Ohio. So we've been talking a lot about hard mast, but there's a lot of soft mast, the fleshy fruits and berries within our oak ecosystems as well. And so I'll just pop up some pictures of some examples of some soft mast that we find within our forests. So some black cherries, the hollies, which are wonderful for a lot of our animals that are active during the winter. They're hanging around on the branches and provide some food. Viburnum is in that upper right corner. And then, of course, one of our largest fruits is the pawpaw. And it's always a race between you and the raccoons and deer who gets it first, right? And then in that lower left picture, that is Virginia creeper. So some of our forest vines provide some really valuable resources. Even poison ivy, which is fun to tell people. We don't like it, but the birds love the white berries that come on towards the end of the year.
Okay, so again, that variety is important.
And very, yeah.
And of course, for private landowners, which we have a fair bit of in our viewership, thinking about this as you make management decisions on your property,
Right.
Because you do want to promote a variety of different food resources and habitat resources for wildlife.
And it depends on your management objectives. Just like you said, you know, if you're a hunter and you're looking for deer, you're looking for turkey or squirrel, then you're really going to want to focus on some of those hard-mast species and promoting that. But you know, if you're a birder and you're interested in birds, then those fleshy berries are really going to bring the birds in and attract those types of species.
Now speaking on that note, so there are some invasive plants that provide lots of fleshy fruits. How do wildlife utilize that as a resource?
They utilize it well. Okay. So let's just talk about one, honeysuckle.
Okay.
That plant is doing everything it can to attract birds. And I'll pop up a slide real quick here. These are two birds that will readily consume honeysuckle berries, and a lot of our songbirds do. So we have, of course, our state bird, the cardinal there, and the cedar waxwing up on the top. Unfortunately, these berries are not as nutritious. The birds don't realize that, so it's our job to get the nasty plants out of there.
Okay.
And you know, we know that they're eating a lot because there's been some evidence of color changes in the feathers.
Wow.
So we've seen evidence of cardinals changing their color a little bit if they're consuming a lot of the honeysuckle berries. And then what you're seeing down there, that is the tail feather tips of a cedar waxwing. They're normally yellow, but when they eat a lot of honeysuckle berries, they start to turn that orange color. Yeah, it's fascinating. So, and with the cardinals, it can actually cause an issue because one of the things that female cardinals look for to determine if the male is of standard to choose as her mate is that bright red color. So, yeah, if they're bright red because of eating honeysuckle berries, then they're not really surviving on a nutritional diet.
Wow.
So, yeah, some challenges out there.
Always. Yeah. So,
right.
Well, Marne, as we kind of are wrapping up here, are there any resources that you would like to share?
Yes, definitely. So I'm popping up a fact sheet here if you want to learn more about different types of mast in Ohio. And then you can find that at our website, woodlandstewards.osu.edu. Woodland Stewards is our private woodland owner program. Really, anybody that's interested in forestry and wildlife, take a look at our website. We offer classes around the state, and hopefully you can join us at some of those classes.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Marne. I think we also have your contact information that will flash up there quickly.
There's my contact information.
Yeah. So, and thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you on Tree Talk again.
Love to be here again.
All
Thanks.
right.